Our next speaker is Megan Pusey. She's here to talk about what video games have taught me about designing for motivation. Megan is a PhD candidate at Murdoch University, researching video games motivation and resilience. And she's here to tell us about what video games have taught her about designing for motivation. So please give her a hand.
Thank you all for coming. Obviously, a quick thank you to our sponsors, without which DDD couldn't happen. I'm also working at IBM, so I have to do the obligatory, this is my personal views, not that representing where I work, because I have now just finished up at Murdoch, which is exciting. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Megan. Just finished a PhD in games user research, now doing user research at IBM for enterprise software. Previously worked as a physics teacher and a science communicator for places like SciTech. And so I have a bit of a varied background, hence that is why my Twitter handle is the way it is. I wanted to start the talk with a little thought experiment. If I had a very thickly slathered piece of Vegemite toast, not my ideal ratio of Vegemite to bread or toast, hands up, just a show of hands, how many people would be quite happy to come and eat this lovely piece of Vegemite toast? Quite a few. Keep your hands up. What about if I now offered you $5 to come and eat this piece of Vegemite toast? Anyone willing for $5? What about $50? Anyone? Okay, a few more. 200? There's a few people still with their hands down, but I'm sure you have a price in mind to, withstand the very polarizing taste of Vegemite. I wanted to use this as an example because it's a really good love-hate relationship. And some people are more than happy to eat Vegemite for fun. Others need a bit of a different type of motivation. So things we do for fun, we have internal or intrinsic motivation. Things that we might not do for fun, maybe we need a bit of reward, like money. That we call external or extrinsic motivation, and we'll come back to those shortly. So video games as a product or an industry is made for leisure and as a hobby, so they have to be designed around intrinsic motivation and for fun. So good UX or a good player experience is really core to the game as a product and doing well. However, coming into enterprise software or websites or apps, sometimes good UX is a nice to have that's added on at the end and not the primary core of the experience. But also, to be fair, we use them differently. They're more like a tool we use to get a job done. They're not necessarily there for leisure. So, comparing the two, one being mostly intrinsic motivation and one being mostly extrinsic motivation, how could we learn some lessons from the world of video games and apply them to enterprise software or websites or apps? And I will just pause here to say I'm not going to be talking about gamification in turning these tools into games, but more about how could we tweak them to be more intrinsically motivating. So one of the theories that I've done a lot of work in, and I won't bore you with it, but basically the theory says that intrinsic motivation is made of 3 elements. So there's autonomy, which is a fancy way of saying you have choice and control over things. Competence, which means you feel skilled at doing a particular activity or your skill is improving. You don't have to be a master at the activity. And relatedness, which is feeling a connection to other people or a community of people. So these 3 things combining together help make stuff really intrinsically motivating and fun to do. Working in design, love a good how might we statement. So having worked at IBM for a bit now, I thought, well, how might we, as a fun challenge, design enterprise software to be more intrinsically motivating to use? Again, without turning it into a game, because it is meant to be a tool. starting with our first element of autonomy, games usually do this really well. One good example of this is from competitive first-person shooter games usually. This is a screenshot from a Fortnite menu where the game is allowing you to completely remap your controller. You have complete control over which button does what. So you can make it to your liking. Not all games do this, but the competitive games usually do this a bit better than others. And a good example from other software that give you good choice and control is the Adobe Suite. You can completely move the menus around, change which icons are in your menu. I'm left-handed, so if I was to do any drawing on a touch screen, I'd move all the menus to the right-hand side, and it enables me to do that. Not all software does. So that's one good example of offering choice and control in a non-game scenario. Another great one is Slack, and a lot of other software has a light and a dark mode. Slack goes a little bit further with the different color modes. And if you actually scroll all the way to the bottom, Dawn mentioned this in her accessibility talk this morning as well, but there are actually a few color schemes specifically designed for people with different types of color blindness. And offering choice and control over things that might seem like a really small deal to you can have a really great added benefit of improving accessibility for some of your other users that you might not even recognize when you first add this feature in. Moving on to our second strand, which is competence. Lots of video games do this really well as well, because they essentially have to teach you how to use the game while you're in the game. One of my favorite games that I've used in my research, which was really fun, is called Untitled Goose game. The premise is that you are a mischievous goose running around an English village causing mayhem. So in each section of the village, you get a to-do list, and as you complete the to-do list, it crosses off that action, and different tasks are more difficult than others. So when you go shopping, if you put the toothbrush in the basket, it will cross off just the word toothbrush. And if the toothbrush somehow comes out of the basket, it uncrosses off as well, so it's like reactive. So games do quest logs, missions, and checklists like this really, really, really well. And you feel a sense of progress, like you've achieved something. Also really handy, like me, if you haven't played the game, you forget about it and you come back 6 months later and you can't remember what you're up to. These quest logs and checklists can help you go, oh, that's right, I was trying to steal shopping items from this poor shopkeeper. And one online course I was doing recently through the Interaction Design Foundation, I thought did this really well. In their website, all their courses follow this sort of layout. So on the left here, we've got their clear progression of chapters or lessons. Within each lesson, we've got sub-parts, and as you complete them, you get a nice green tick. And as you earn points by answering questions throughout the course, the blue points sort of float up to the progress bar up the top there, so you can clearly see how much you've got left to go until you get the little course certificate. So it's a nice visual reminder of the progress you've made so far. And as you get closer and closer to the end, it becomes even more and more motivating because you're like, oh, just a few more points and I'm finished. And so yeah, they're on the left. Other places do this really well. I liked the Salonis example, but I noticed Udemy also does this really well. They'll have a time indicator next to each step or segment, especially if it's video-based. And that gives you a good indication of how difficult or how long the task is going to take. So I know for me, if I only have a half hour or so, I'm not going to start anything too complicated because I'm not going to get it finished. And by offering these sort of indicators of difficulty or time, you can make a good judgment about whether you want to start that activity now or not. A bad example, as a researcher, I like doing other people's surveys to see what they've done at a professional interest. I had an Etsy survey pop up as I was browsing. You can see I was browsing Pokemon plush toy thingos. So I pressed, sure, I'll do your annoying pop-up survey. And this was the first question, but immediately I kind of noticed, well, I was in the middle of doing something. I'm doing you a favor, and you're not telling me how long this is going to take. No indication of progress. And I've used Qualtrics before. Same with Microsoft Forms, and I'm sure many of the other ones. There is always an option there to enable the progress bar, which just puts a little bar at the top or the bottom to show you a percentage of how far through the survey you are. Just a small thing like that can help motivate people to complete the task. Same with retail websites and shopping checkout baskets. You often see the steps listed or how close you are to finishing that purchase. So about 2 or 3 questions in my head I'm going, I want to get back to what I was doing. How much longer have I got left to go? I want to quit this and just keep doing what I was doing. I was just curious, so I kept going, and it was about 5 quick questions, but I could see, I imagine on the back end there'd be quite a lot of churn or a lot of people dropping out after that second question because there's no indication of how long this thing is going for. And our third stream, which is an interesting one because we're talking about connection to other people and building community, and immediately people think about that as being real-time or multiplayer in the game sense, but it doesn't have to be. So I will start with a multiplayer game because that's the obvious, I guess, friendship building or breaking activity in video games. One of my favorite genres is called couch co-op. This is one example called Overcooked, where you're working as a team of 4 to finish these orders in this level where they're making burgers. And usually the levels are set out in such a way that only certain people can do certain steps of the process. So like a team where you've got a dev and a designer and you can only, no one person can do everything, so you're having to yell at one another, cook the steak, what are you doing, hurry up, and pass me the tomatoes, where's this, yeah, so there's a lot of yelling, but it's really fun, and you're working, in this game you're working to a clock, so you have to do as many as possible in the time limit to pass the level. So I find them really fun, other people find them really stressful, but that designing the levels in such a way that one person cannot do the level alone helps build that teamwork. And one tool I've been using a lot of recently that I think has a lot of features to make real-time collaboration online really good, and there's lots of tools like this one, this isn't the only one, is Mural. It's like an online whiteboard where you can put fake digital sticky notes on there. Some of the features I like is that when you're all on the same mural, you can see everyone's pointers. It has their name next to it, so you can clearly see where everyone is and what they're doing. If you're a facilitator, you have facilitator superpowers. You can summon everyone to view what you're viewing on the screen. You can lock things down so other people can't move and mess with your templates when you're doing brainstorming. And so it has a lot of really, really nice features to enable you to do that real-time stuff together really, really well. And again, linking back to choice and control, a lot of these features you can turn on and off if you made the mural yourself. So often a lot of clients I'm working with have never used this tool before, so we lock down a lot of things so they can't mess with it, and get them to follow our screen and guide them through the process. So those features are really good for that. Another example of communication in games, again, this is a competitive first-person sort of game, but it's a team game. So you're working on a team of 5 or 6, and a few other games also do this really well, but I just couldn't find a good screenshot to show it. So Apex Legends probably does this the best. It's called a ping system, where very quickly you have to communicate information, very important information to your team. So on your controller or keyboard, you can press a button, and there's just a standard menu of things, and you can customize this menu as well, but these are the most common messages you want to share with your team, and you can ping a particular location on the map, and your whole team can then see that piece of information very quickly. It's quicker than trying to type or say it over voice often, and if you've watched any esports, they will use a ping system quite a lot, and they'll be very short and sharp with their verbal communication. The closest I could think of like this, but not in games, was probably the whole reaction thing in social media and in places like LinkedIn. It allows you to show support or show a sense of community quickly without having to put effort into it. So you're like, hey, yeah, well done, yay, DDD, I'm excited, without having to spend the time typing that message in. One interesting example that I like bringing up a lot from video games as it's more asynchronous is Sky, which is a great game you can get on tablets in the Switch. You run around, it's single player, and the Dark Souls games do this as well. You can leave a particular item in the world and attach a message to that item, and other players can then go and discover that item and read your message. Sometimes in Dark Souls, players will leave clues about how to defeat the next boss or watch out for a particular trap. Sometimes it's jokes, sometimes it's fake information to make you go and die in a particular place. Sky's a bit more nice as a game. It's not, Dark Souls is pretty punishing. But it's this way that they build a sense of community and connection without it being real time. And it's a single player game. Often we think of single player experiences as not being social, whereas this is a very, very social single player game. I couldn't really, it took me a while to think of an example from non-games, but I do remember in having done some writing for a website called Particle, they used a service called Gather Content, and essentially, shared documents do this as well. It was really easy for people to leave comments on my article asynchronously. I could log in and then see what they had written and then go and make the relevant edits or changes that were requested. Same with shared Google Docs or online, Office 365 documents. I think this one is, I see it being used more and more. It's a great way to asynchronously work together on something without doing the track changes in Word, which I find very painful. So Gather Content's a great example of that, as well as just general shared collaborative documents. I did want to spend 2 seconds quickly talking about competitive elements, which often come up when people start talking about gamification. So back to the Interaction Design Foundation screen, they do have a ranking of your score, and I think if you get the max score for the course, you can have multiple people sitting at first. And it goes up as you get more points. And the best I've seen competitive done, I guess, in a gamey kind of sense is, in a non-game game, is Duolingo, which is for learning languages. What I liked about Duolingo is that competitive things can be really demotivating if you're losing, especially if you have no way to get back to the top, to get back to winning. So the way that Duolingo combat this is you get a lot of points just by participating, number one, great, just for trying. And that you can see that there's a limit on the leaderboard. So I don't know what the refresh time is, maybe it's every week. Every week they'll refresh and restart the leaderboards from scratch. So even if you were losing 1 week, next week you're in with a whole nother shot. So it's a lot more motivating to have that refreshing leaderboard and that ability to get back to be potentially winning. So I think use competitive, or look at competitive elements with a real grain of salt, because I think you always need to consider the losers. How is it going to feel to be the loser? If there's low stakes, that's better. If there's high stakes, it really sucks to be the loser. Is there any way for them to come back from losing? Or think about those things as well, not just the winners. Motivation's really tricky when you start making it competitive versus collaborative. That was all I had time for today. Thank you so much for choosing to come to my session. I know there was many amazing talks on at this same time. I don't have any time for questions now, but I'm happy to answer any questions at afternoon tea, or you can just tweet me and I'll hopefully respond. And yeah, happy to chat, but thank you for coming.